Hey, he's here.
Yeah,
Flip.
let's do it.
I'm walking redemption.
Hey everyone, welcome to another Sit Down with Michael Franzese. Hope everybody is doing well. Everything is very good, very blessed on this end. As always, I give God all the praise, honor, glory, and thanksgiving for that. Before I get into today's great video, I believe, great topic, I just want to thank everybody. I've been getting such good referrals and just a lot of praise for Franzese wine. So I want to bring you up to date quickly. I'm going to actually have a sip of it while I do. We're in a number of states now. We're in 156 Ralph stores in Southern California. We're going into Safe Mart. We just made a deal with a big distributor in Nevada. We'll be all over Las Vegas. Safe Mart has 200 stores throughout California and into Nevada also. We're now in Illinois, in Mariano's throughout Chicago, the city of Chicago, I think 97 of them. We're in Michigan, we're in Ohio, we're now in North Carolina, and pretty soon we're going to be in Texas and Florida. So we're going to be in about 12 states this year, in addition to our online direct-to-consumer capacity that we have. So people are really enjoying the wine. Pretty soon we're going to be in a city near you, just about every city in the country, I would assume, and hopefully at some point in time, most cities throughout the world. So thank you for enjoying the wine and supporting us. All my associates are doing very well. Appreciate that, but salute to all of that. Maybe one day we'll be able to all enjoy a glass of Franzese wine together. Let me tell you what today is about and how it came about. A very dear friend of mine, Mike Caparelli, who was a former pastor, dear friend, I spoke at his church several years ago. He called me up a while ago and told me that he was visiting the son of Sam, David Berkowitz. And I said, Mike, why would you be doing that? And he kind of got into the background a little bit. You know, he is a behavioral science, PhD in behavioral science, and very knowledgeable, very learned guy, wonderful guy. He was a great pastor, really built Sacred Exchange Church in Rhode Island. He did a wonderful job there for several years. And then he decided to leave that portion of the ministry and became a PhD in, like I said, behavioral science. Just a really great guy. And he talked to me about, you know, why he went to visit David Berkowitz. And through that conversation, he said, Mike, I don't know if you know this, but David is a Christian and he read your book several years ago. I said, you're kidding me. He said, no. And I said, well, how much time did you spend with him? And he said, I spent about 100 hours. And I said, well, what do you feel about his conversion, about his accepting Christ? And he said, Michael, I think it's genuine. I really do. I believe in him. He said, and it was some of the most interesting, if not the most interesting 100 hours I've ever spent in my life. I said, wow. I said, so why are you calling me? And he told me about this book that he was writing, and I have it right here, Monster Mirror, and it is all about David Berkowitz. And he said, I would love for you to come and meet David. And I said, well, he's in prison for life. Where is he? And he said, well, he's in Sullivan County, which is a state prison in New York. And I said, well, you know, I can't easily get into every prison, but we can try the process and see if they'll take me in. I said, but why should I want to go? He said, well, he is a Christian. He did read your book, and I think it's going to be an interesting conversation. He'd love to meet you. Now, let me go back. If you don't know who the son of Sam is, look him up. I mean, you can Google it. It's all over the place. And of course, you're going to hear about him. But the summer of 1977 in New York, tough time. The city was really in bad shape. We had a lot of things going on. Crime was high, probably not as high as it is today. I remember we had a blackout, a citywide blackout for about 24, 25 hours. I think 1,600 businesses were robbed. You know, the city was practically bankrupt. Mayor Abraham Beam was the mayor at that time. Didn't do such a great job. Nice guy, but not a great job in the city. And of course, I was running around the streets as a Colombo family soldier at that point in time, just building up my, you know, kind of reputation in that life. So I knew what was going on there in the city. And then all of a sudden in that summer, boom, the son of Sam hits. And what do I mean hits? Well, he was after young men and women in these kind of lovers lane places. He sees them parked in a car, boom, 44 caliber gun, and he shoots them. And he was a serial killer. I think he killed 7 or 8 people, something like that, injured maybe another one. And again, I'm not going to get into that whole part of it because that you can Google, you can look it up. I decided to take the invitation to meet him for a different reason. You know, the mental health issue that we have now here in this country and probably throughout the world is just terrible. It's almost out of control. And, you know, I thought about it and I spoke to Michael about it, and he said, you know, Mike, it's a mental health issue. And we're experiencing that so much now in the United States, so many things. He started to quote some statistics for me, which I'm going to do for you in a moment. And I said, well, was it a mental health issue with David? And he said, yeah, to a degree it was. And I said, well, look, I'm not going to go there and hear any excuses from this guy, you know, or anything else. He's doing life in prison. He's never going to come home. I don't know if he's trying to cop a plea or whatever. I don't know what his motivation is. He said, Michael, take the meeting. He said, if we can get you in, come and sit down with him and then formulate your own opinion. Now, I will tell you, I'm a Christian, and I know some people are going to say, well, Michael, how dare you sit down with a guy like this? I mean, a murderer, destroyed lives, did what he did. Well, that's true, and I'm not going to certainly cop a plea for him. I'm not going to say what he did was justified, whether it was a mental illness or not. There's no justification for murdering people. And I think we have to understand that in society today. Murder is murder, and there's no justification. There might be factors that led up to that, and we can discuss that, and you'll hear David, and we can talk about that. But there's no justification for it, and I'm not here to say it was justified in any way. He's serving a life sentence, and most likely that's what he deserves. I will tell you this, I did sit down with him, and I want to tell you this right off the bat. He said to me, first off, Michael, I make no excuses for what I did. I'm not looking for sympathy. I take full responsibility for what I did. I'm never going home. As a matter of fact, I stopped going to the parole board. I didn't want to go. I deserved to be in here. But I found out that I have to go to the parole board. They were upset with me that I didn't go, so I just go. I don't expect to be paroled. And if I serve out the rest of my time here for the rest of my life, that's what I deserve. He was very honest and upfront about it, and I believe in what he said. He wasn't putting on a show for me. And I came out of there after, about an hour, and I was convinced that he's very sincere. And you know, people are going to have trouble with this, but you got to understand this. You know, the basis of Christianity is forgiveness. Not too long ago, you know, it was Good Friday and Easter Sunday, and it was on Good Friday that Jesus died for the forgiveness of all sins. The only unforgivable sin is the sin of blasphemy, and blasphemy of the Holy Spirit is the rejection of Jesus Christ. So in our faith, we believe that if we sincerely confess our sins, and the key there is sincerely. People, you can't confess your sins and then continue to live in a pattern of sin. That's not true. If you're going to confess your sins, I'm not saying you're going to repeat them because we're weak and we do, but you're not going to live in that same pattern of sin. You're just not. Because sincerity in your asking for forgiveness has to show that there is improvement. So if we believe that if you are sincerely sorry for your sins and you accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, then your sin is forgiven and Jesus will direct you to heaven. That's what we believe. And as a Christian, I'm a firm believer of that. And I believe the 10 greatest words ever spoken in the history of humanity were spoken by Jesus Christ, an innocent man hanging on the cross, died for the forgiveness of the sins of all humanity. And he looked up to the sky to his Father and he said these 10 words, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. If Jesus can forgive those people that persecuted him in such a horrible way, who are we not to forgive? And as Christians, real believers in Christ, that's what we believe. Now let me do this. I'll get a comment, sure as heck, from people that are maybe Christian haters, Christian doubters, whatever. Oh yeah, Michael, well maybe if he had murdered one of your children or your wife or somebody close to you, you might have a different feeling. Well, you know what? Initially, maybe I might. I'm being honest. I'm human. Maybe there would be that hatred, that want for revenge or vengeance. But I believe in time it would subside because I am a true believer. I believe solidly in Jesus Christ. I really do. And I believe in the concept of forgiveness. Forgiveness is something that takes a tremendous weight off of your shoulder. And my wife will tell you I'm a pretty forgiving person. I just am. So, and I attribute my faith to that. So, But really why I wanted to sit down with him, this whole mental health issue. You know, what caused this guy to do this? Really, what was it? I wanted to delve into that and find out. Now, Mike Caparelli, I got to tell you this. I was so fascinated by the book, he asked me to write the foreword, and I wrote the foreword to the book. It's a fascinating book. Spending 100 hours with a serial killer, a guy that's, got a PhD in behavioral science, a brilliant guy, a great man, a strong Christian. And his perspective on this, his analysis on this is really worth reading because it can open up your eyes to other people that are having mental health issues. And I wanted to hear what David had to say because I thought maybe something would come out of him that could be helpful to others. And that's within this book. I strongly recommend this book. You can go on Amazon. It's fascinating. You're going to hear an interview of my hour with him, but 100 hours with David is going to be very eye-opening, very revealing, and very fascinating. And let me just read you some statistics. If you think I'm downplaying or not speaking, enough about this mental health issue, let me read these stats. Approximately 1 in 5 adults in the U.S. experience mental illness in a given year. 1 in 5 adults. 2, depression is one of the most common mental health disorders affecting over 17 million adults. People, I just saw my daughter go through depression for something tragic. I think I've spoken about it before. It's horrible. Depression is horrible. I never believed that I was ever depressed, but I see depression in people. It's a real disease. It's very, very serious. And 17 million people, 17 million adults are experiencing that every year. Number 3, suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in the U.S. with over 48,000 deaths each year. And it's caused by a mental illness, most all of the time. 48,000 deaths from suicide caused by some form of mental illness. Anxiety disorders affect over 40 million adults in the U.S., making it the most common mental illness. Anxiety, a big problem. People, I've seen that in people, and it's a disease. There's no question about it, and some people can't control it. Mental health conditions are the leading cause of disability in the U.S. and Canada. Did you ever figure that? Disability, mental health issues are the main causes of disability. Only 43% of adults with mental illness receive treatment in a given year. Many of the people that are committing crimes out on the street, many of the homeless that you see, they've been untreated. They have mental illnesses. Not all of them, but many of them do. No question. LGBTQ plus individuals are more than twice as likely as heterosexual individuals to experience a mental health disorder, of course, because some of the things that they're doing it creates mental health issues in them. Not going to get into that now. Substance abuse often occurs with mental illness, with 9.2 million adults experiencing both conditions. Are you hearing this? Post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, affects approximately 8 million adults in the U.S. It's a mental health disorder. And lastly, mental health disorders cost the U.S. economy over $200 billion per year in lost earnings, healthcare expenses, and disability benefits. After reading those stats, for those of you that didn't believe or didn't understand that mental health illness is a real serious problem, it causes a lot of bad things to happen in a lot of sometimes good people, and not sometimes people that have a tendency to do the wrong thing. So when you listen to this interview, please listen to his story, because it's going to be fascinating. You're going to think this guy came from a bad home, was mentally abused by his parents, physically abused and all of that. You're going to be surprised when you hear, his background, and when you hear what led him to do some of the horrible things that he did, all of these murders. So, Son of Sam, again, if you want to see more about this, just Google it. You'll hear everything you need to know. Summer of 1977, horrible crime, serial killer. But I sat down with him in the Sullivan County Jail. I want to say this up front. You're going to see most of my back. We were only allowed to bring in one camera. They didn't give us, everything that we wanted, but I was fortunate just to get in. So you're going to see mostly my good friend Mike, who is there during the interview, and David. You're going to hear him speak mostly. You'll see my back, but hey, you see me all the time. You don't need to see that much of me. So without any further hesitation, here is the interview.
I actually wrote a book a few years ago, mailed a copy of the book to David, along with a Christmas card. The book was mental health issues from a Christian perspective. David read the book, wrote me back. We planned to visit. I met with him in early 2022, and we began a relationship where we focused specifically on the mental health factors and some of the spiritual factors behind his crimes, but more importantly, his conversion. The fact that this guy who did what he did is now a transformed individual was one of the real big focuses of the book, but also the story, how this all happened. David took a liking to me because of really a dual qualification as both a clergyman, somebody that's pastored for 16 years, as well as having a PhD in behavioral science to explain some of the stuff that was going on in his head at that time.
What made you send him?
I grew up, my dad was in prison. I remember visiting him as a kid, like yourself, and always had a passion for prison ministry. Worked with inmates in Rhode Island, worked with inmates in Gardner, Massachusetts, and just always had a heart for prison ministry. So one day I said, I'm going to send this book to David Berkowitz.
I was going to say, why David?
Well, I heard David's story through, believe it or not, the 700 Club many, many years ago. I remember that testimony on the 700 Club making an impact on me. And I said, boy, wouldn't it be interesting to get to know a guy like this and to tell his story for this world to hear? There's so many people right now in our culture that are mentally unwell. I mean, there are 13 mass shootings a week in the United States of America, and the culture's looking for answers.
Mike, you need to repeat that. How many mass shootings?
13 mass shootings a week in the United States of America. That includes currently, right now, school shootings, mall shootings. The culture's sick.
So many of them are not widely reported because we don't hear all of that.
True.
And how does that compare to other parts of the world? How does it compare to Europe?
Usually in your more collectivist countries, which means the community ties are tight, you don't see this kind of senseless violence. America happens to rank very high on individualism, which means we're a pretty isolated society. That might sound not true because of social media, but the reality is you can have 5,000 friends and you don't know any of them. So our level of isolation, our level of social disintegration is one of the big factors, I believe. Not just that, it's a recipe. I mean, with David, we met 100 hours, 9 themes surfaced in that 100 hours. I call it a recipe for violence. And like any recipe, you can't just isolate one ingredient. It's the combination of ingredients. But one of those ingredients was loneliness, was the isolation. David had many friends growing up, but not confidants, not people he trusted enough to let into his inner world. And I believe that that's a problem today. There's a pandemic right now of violence because of that.
Well, I want to tell you, regarding mental health issues, I'm not going to mention the school or the person, but I have a very dear friend of mine who is the chief of police at a major university. And I visited that, spoke to his staff. And would you believe that a major university, that there is a suicide from one of these young women, suicide from one of these young men and women every month?
I believe
At least one a month.
I believe it. Well, David will tell you himself when he tells his story, much of what was behind Son of Sam was a suicide mission. It wasn't just a man unleashing his rage on a city. It was a man at the cusp of self-destruction. He wasn't just destroying other people. He was destroying himself. And that depression, believe it or not, undergirds much of the rage we see in our culture. God made it clear it's not good for man to be alone. We need community. And that's really one of the important messages of the book, is the importance of relationship with people, and mainly relationship with God.
Well, my God, I will tell you this, I spent 29 months and 7 days in isolation. And if it wasn't for my relationship with the Lord and my relationship with my wife and children, even though I wasn't with them, I knew they were there. I was still in the community of family. I don't know that I would have made it through it. And I saw a lot of things go wrong in there with guys that didn't have that. I was fortunate. And that's why I'm so interested in speaking to David, because look, I gotta be real honest with you. You know, it's very hard. Forgiveness is a very hard concept.
Yes. Yes.
You realize if somebody would hurt your family,
Absolutely.
forgiveness is so difficult. And but if you're not a Christian, you don't understand God's. It's beyond you to understand how you can forgive.
Truth.
So it's just really interesting to me to be able to sit down with him. I totally believe in the transformation. Not even having spoken to him there. But I know what God can do. I know what
Yes.
He's done to me, you know, with me. So but it's very interesting the way this came about. And you know what? I want to applaud you for taking an interest. And I know you as a pastor and obviously your profession, but to take an interest in someone like this, I think if more people had a heart like that, this would be a better world.
I believe it.
And I mean that.
Hey, he's here.
Yeah, flip, let's do it. David, I'll be honest, I've been looking forward to this, you know, and, you know, we do have a kinship, I would guess. You're two guys from New York,
Yeah.
Bronx,
Yeah.
from Brooklyn.
Okay.
I know you have to be a diehard Yankee fan like me.
I grew up there, Yankees, going to Yankee games as a kid. Yeah. Sure.
And so I feel we have something in common. And, you know, I'll be honest with you. Back in the 70s when, you know, you were in your thing, I was also wreaking a little bit of havoc on the streets too.
Okay,
You know my background. So,
Sure.
you know, as a matter of fact, David, there was, I think it was 1976 or 77 in Queens when somebody had spotted you, or thought they may have spotted you. You know, the police at that time had come to us. They were looking for help. And so we were kind of looking for you at the time. I'm glad we didn't find you.
Okay. Well, the main thing is Jesus found me.
Jesus.
Come on.
Yeah. You know what?
I wouldn't be here now if it wasn't for him.
Let me tell you something, David. More than anything else, that's what we have in common. You know, we're brothers in Christ.
That's right.
And what I love about this, in Mike's book, I read the back page.
Okay.
And I think this is really important to understand, kind of set up this meeting. You know, you say you don't make excuses for anything that you've done. I really admire that in you, but there is an explanation. And I think that's what this is all about.
Sure.
You know, in my life, the same thing. I'll make excuses for what I did, but I can explain certain things. And that's just what people can understand.
Sure.
We all have something in our backgrounds that we're dealing with. And, you know, I would love to start there. I mean, just, you know, talk to me about, you know, your childhood,
Right.
how it was growing up, because I think a lot of these things that we do in later life results from our childhood.
Yeah, sure. Well, yeah, I mean, I've had certain experiences that maybe were different than many kids, but I grew up in the Bronx, and it was a life of, grew up in a place where there was a lot of adventure, Soundview section, and I had good parents, you know, who loved me, and, you know, I couldn't ask for better parents. And I guess when I was doing okay as a child till maybe the age of 4 or 5, and for whatever reason, my behavior began to change, and I think that one day my parents, I was around 5 years old, they called me into the living room. I remember that day clearly, and they said they wanted to talk to me about something, and they had very stern faces, you know, serious. So I said, I remember sitting there in a chair in the living room in our apartment in the Bronx, and they said, listen, we just want you to know, David, that we love you very much, but we also want you to know that, you know, we adopted you. You're adopted. And now I didn't know what that was. So I'm looking at them and say, well, okay, well, what does that mean? You know, and they said that, well, we always wanted a child, but we couldn't have one. And we found out that there was a child going up for adoption. And they said, listen, your mom died at childbirth while giving birth to you, and your dad couldn't take care of you, so he put you up for adoption. And so when we got the news, we were very happy, and we made arrangements to get you and bring you to us, you know. And this was a shock, I think, because I wasn't expecting anything like that. they weren't saying anything wrong, anything, but it was like, I was very confused. I said, well, who's my mom? What happened to her? They said, well, she died while giving birth to you, and the doctor had to make a decision whether to let you live or your mom, and he chose you. And that's why, you were here. We're so glad that we have you. And I didn't quite understand that. I was trying to process that.
What you said?
About 5 years old. And then my next question was, well, who was my father? And they said they didn't know anything about him, but that he just couldn't take care of me, so he put me up for adoption. And I think that was like a time of trauma. That was a time of internal trauma. I think a wound was open because of my confusion. I didn't know how to process that. And so I asked my other friends, we'd be playing around what adoption is, and I was adopted, and they blinked their eyes, and nobody seemed to know, because all my other friends had siblings, and so their families were more normal. But I think that began to change me, my behavior too. I was becoming disruptive, and I would think it was always hyperactive to begin with, and they were concerned about that, because I'd leave things a mess and had all the signs and symptoms of hyperactivity, attention deficit disorder, although back then it wasn't recognized at the time. And so that was a heavy weight to deal with. And I think that over time it began the start of my changing my behavior.
Can you speak on what you believed during the process of your birth mother delivering you, what you believed happened?
Well, I think that I had probably done something to her, that maybe somehow I misbehaved in the womb, and I was fighting or kicking her or something, or I scratched her or hurt her in some way to cause her death, because I still, as a child, I couldn't understand, well, why did she die giving birth?
You were actually thinking that?
Yeah, she must have certainly been, because I wanted the explanation. It was very disconcerting to think that she died while giving birth to me. And so
That kind of explanation might seem foolish to us as grown adults, but Piaget, who's a famous psychologist, was a famous psychologist, elaborates on the reasoning of a 5-year-old. 5-year-olds are very egocentric, meaning they think they're the cause of everything and anything that happens in the environment. So it's not far-fetched to believe that you tell a 5-year-old, mom died during the pregnancy, and the 5-year-old walks away believing, I caused this. Somehow this is my fault. Somehow, I caused this, and guilt now is internalized.
Let me ask you, David, did you develop any resentment towards your parents at all at that point?
I wouldn't say any real resentment towards them. I just was bewildered by the whole thing. I was just trying to process that. And I think it left me with a lot of guilt that I was unconscious of, because I thought that somehow I was responsible for causing my mother's death. And I couldn't think of what I could have possibly done. Again, I'm just a little child. But it started me off on a lot of self-destructive behavior patterns that had become part of the character of my life, just ruining things, always getting myself in trouble and things like that. And I was a hard-to-manage kid. They had a lot of problems with me growing up. It could be pretty wild. I had a lot of anger, a lot of frustration. Because it was all guilt. I figured if I did something to harm my mother and cause her death, then I don't deserve anything but to die. Who am I? And this is just what I was wrestling with, I guess, within myself. Looking back in retrospect, I'm not conscious of this at the time, but years later, as an adult, and after I became a Christian, and God opened up a lot of things for me to understand, more of a deeper understanding. I realized those are the things I actually thought that I was processing, trying to cope with that. My understanding was not correct, but that's the way I behaved. As far as thinking, I'm always putting myself in a position where I would be punished for something, do something wrong. Even if I was doing something successful, I'll find a way to wreck it. And I guess I had also a lot of anger towards God. And because I'm saying, God, why did you allow this to happen to me? Because my mom, my adopted mother, Pearl, she was kind of religious. She was religious. And, I'd say my prayers or something before bed. And she liked, being Jewish, she would light the Sabbath candles and things like that. So we weren't overly religious, but I believed in God. And I was kind of angry at God that I even came into the world, It was a lot to process.
I think where David's guilt and shame show up the most is in his dreams. As a kid, he had continual nightmares of his birth father looking to kill him for killing his wife. Freud said that the dream life often reveals what's happening subconsciously, that the dream world is a mental safety valve, that the subconscious fears that we have show up in our dreams. And for David, it was this constant nightmare that dad was coming.
Yeah, I had two ideas, two sets of beliefs, because I was by this time I was misbehaving a lot, causing my parents a lot of grief, and they were trying to cope with me. And so I had two ideas of one, as Mike said, about this man would be angry at me and want to hurt me for some reason, and they would come to get me, crawl through the fire escape or something, and there you are, you little brat, look what you did to your mother, here you are, And so I had that fear.
Did you dream about that?
I had dream about it, mainly more like daydreams, of a sense that, this would happen. And I also had a dream because I was starting to become depressed a lot. I had issues of depression, and there was so much more going on besides that I thought that maybe my dad would say that he wants me after all, that he was coming to rescue me and get me. So he climbed the fire escape and said, David, here I am. Come on, let's go. I'm your dad. You're my dad. And come on, we'll be happy ever after. And he'd take me in, and we go off into the sunset or whatever and lead a whole new life. I just struggle with those things, quite a bit. Yeah.
Let me ask you this. As a parent, I have 7 children of my own, and we have our issues, obviously, but do you think, in retrospect, it might have been a mistake for your parents to tell you that at such a young age?
I probably was not mature enough to handle it then, but they didn't mean any harm.
Right.
Because back then, I guess the school of thought was to tell the child that story. Because later on, when I began to look for my birth mother, and I joined this organization called ALMA, Adoptees Liberty Movement Association, which helps people that have been adopted to get to their roots, as well as help those who put up a child for adoption to try to locate the child to see where they are. And there's like this show on that TV that's based on that kind of thing.
Where do you think you are?
No. The one where Long Lost Family. Long Lost Family. Yeah, where adoptees find their birth parents, or one of both birth parents, and vice versa. So years later, as an adult, I got into the Army, and I found out about this organization and joined them. And because I wanted to, it was a longing desire to find out what my roots were. Who was my family? It's a whole story in itself. When I went to their first meeting, where they have the introductory meeting for new members and things, and some of the people were all sharing, I got up, oh, is this a new member here? David, you want to tell us about yourself? And I just spoke for like 2 minutes, explaining that I was trying to find my birth father because my mom died while giving birth to me. And some of them started to kind of like chuckle a little bit. And they said, listen, we were all told the same thing. What? And they said, no, we were told the same thing, that because at that time, that's what the professionals said to say to adoptive parents, if you're to tell the child they're adopted, unless you have another story, tell them that. So that was, some of them were familiar with that, and I realized that may not be true. But when I did I got my original birth certificate. That's a whole story in itself, how I searched for that. This was after I was out of the service and, starting my life again after the Army. I found out from my dad, when I saw the original birth certificate that had been blocked by the courts, my dad had original in his vault. my adoptive father, and he gave it to me. And I saw the name of my father, Anthony Falco, Tony Falco, and I says, "Hey, wait a minute."
That's Italian.
Yeah, that's the whole thing. So I was very curious, and my dad finally told me. My adoptive father, Nat, he was living now in Florida. We spoke over the phone, and he told me the real story. He says, well, "Okay, well, here's the story. Dave, your mom didn't die while giving birth to you. You know, that you were born out of wedlock, and the father, I guess, didn't want to keep you, so they put you up for adoption, which was normal back then. And so we got word that a family in Brooklyn, woman in Brooklyn, wanted to put up a child for adoption, and they made the connection, and eventually that worked out, and they took me home. But I found out that I was very confused about that name, so I began to search through all the Brooklyn phone books for Falcos, calling one Falco after another, and there's like 100 of them, and nobody knew anything. But later on, when I did find my birth mother, well, we had a wonderful reunion. It was really beautiful, but beautiful. At this time, about 22. And she told me the story, that her boyfriend's name was Joe, just Joe, and it was not Tony Falco. That was she was married to him, and they owned a fish store in Brooklyn, in Williamsburg section of Brooklyn. Little Falco's Fish Market. Was it in the late night fish market?
I remember it. Yes,
You
that's
do.
what I'm saying. Yes.
There was a Falco's Fish Market.
Yes.
Okay. Well,
Yeah, there was.
what year was that?
Oh gosh, it had to be in the late 50s. 60s.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Well, that's
That's
unusual.
his birth mother's
Yeah.
fish market.
Yeah.
That was Tony's fish market, but he ran off with another woman, leaving her stranded. So she had to fend for herself, raising a daughter. I have a half sister. That was Tony brought into the world with my mom, Betty, and so they eventually Betty had a relationship with this man Joe, and then that's where I came from. She had a long-term relationship with him. He took care of her. He owned some property. He had a family of his own, and so that's how it basically came about. Yeah.
And this all just really played very heavy on your mind here.
Well, I was very happy to find my birth family. We had a wonderful, great. I had a sister I never knew, and she was so sweet and wonderful. And my mom was so nice. She explained the whole story to me. Nice Jewish lady, she could really cook, and she was a homemaker, and we hit it off. But over the years, I just had really gone. Began to have other problems with my life in different ways that would really affected things, So I don't know how to explain it.
So at the point you finally did meet your mom, you already experienced.
Oh yeah, right. I had all kinds of behavioral problems. I mean, just hyperactivity. I was struggling with a lot with depression, and these are things that came about not necessarily because of that alone, but just other things that were going on with my life. I had some struggles, but I had a lot of good times too. I mean, I had a lot of adventures and fun with growing up in the Bronx. So, so good with the bad.
If I may, this is something that's really interesting to me because I don't think I was ever really depressed in my life. I mean, I spent a lot of time in a hole. You know what that is, almost 3 years. And that was depressing, but it's obvious depression, not happy.
Circumstantial.
But I really believe that depression is real is awful. So many people, and it affects their lives. I mean, I see so many young kids that speak to me now that it's dead. Maybe you can explain.
Well, the depression also correlates with rage because serotonin is a neurotransmitter in the brain that helps us to regulate emotions. Depression and low serotonin go hand in hand. So when a person's serotonin is low, and let's say they fly off the handle, their ability to de-escalate, to come down, is very impaired because the depression has the low serotonin levels. Serotonin is not there to kind of put the brakes on. Look at serotonin as the brakes of a car. So you gun the car, you reach 90, and now you got no brakes. So there's a lot of studies that show the correlation between depression and fits of rage, to a point where I can't de-escalate.
Yeah.
So now, David, you're in your 20s.
Yeah.
When did this turn into something more? Because for me, and being a brother in Christ, I think these things are demonic.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
That when Satan sees somebody struggling like this, you're a perfect mark. It's demonic. And especially if you're not walking with the Lord at that point, it's so hard to overcome.
Yeah. You're,
What all of a sudden make this?
well, again, it's in my childhood, I had issues with depression, with anger, with other things that may have been tied to this sense of deep guilt, which was I was not conscious of, but this deep guilt that I caused my mother's death. It must have really haunted me, and I did a lot of self-destructive behavior patterns. I also was very hyperactive in school. Was a very difficult student in school, in public school, and got in trouble a number of times. I was just hyperactive. I couldn't concentrate. I couldn't focus. I would run home from, as soon as school ended, I was talking about public school, I would run home as fast as I could, several blocks. I just had all this energy. I was full of energy, easily distracted. And so there were just a lot of issues that I was going through in my life at the time. Maybe some of it, a good portion of it may have stemmed from thinking that I caused the death of my mother and being haunted by that. But a lot of it was just other mental health issues, behavioral issues.
Can you talk about the urges to die, the urges to hurt yourself at a young age?
Yeah. I was very, I would kind of like self-harm. I would just take risks and chances, going on the rooftops of buildings, running down the streets, riding my bicycle through traffic, playing around with the subway trains. Me and a couple of my friends, we'd run down the platform from station to station, the above ground elevated lines, and things like that, just, I don't know, I realized when I was older that I had some kind of death wish or something, and it was very, there was a lot of self-destructive behavior patterns.
During your childhood, what was it that made you happy? What did you enjoy?
Running around with my friends, riding my bicycle. My bicycle was one of my favorites, and I played all kinds of sports. I was very active. The little league. We played stickball in the Bronx. We played Scully in the street. We played handball. Did everything, because I was very active, and I rode my bicycle all over the place. So that was a lot of the joys. And, my dad, my adoptive father, Nat, he took me to baseball games in Yankee Stadium. We went once in a while. He had to work a lot, so we didn't get to do that too often. But I was really in many ways a typical kid in the Bronx. I just had issues within myself that were causing me a lot of self-harm.
I think what's eye-opening about David's story, sometimes he's painted in the media as being this loner. The reality is he was a part of an Appalachian mountain club where they climb mountains, not far from here, the Gunks. He's part of baseball teams. He was part of a volunteer fireman club in the Bronx. So he's very socialized. We think isolation means the loner in the corner, hiding. In his case,
That's how it was painted. I remember reading about it.
the reality is he was very socialized, but amidst the crowd, lonely, deeply disconnected, even with the group of people. So I think we need to expand our understanding of isolation. Here he is in the most populated city in America with a lot of friends, a lot of names he can still remember, a lot of experiences, but in the midst of all that, deeply disconnected, it was within, deeply isolated, deeply alone.
Yeah. I always wanted to have a brother or sister. All my other friends had siblings. So I was the only one I know of that was like an only child. But again, I had mood swings where I would lock myself in my bedroom all day and wouldn't talk to my parents. These are all self-destructive things to try to get my parents to hate me. And, you know, because I felt that I needed to be punished. That's the whole thing. Is had a lot of some unconscious guilt. So I always created situations, not consciously, it just would come naturally to make them angry at me, so they'd throw me out of the house or something like that. I used to kind of like run away from home a bit, not like all day, but I'd just disappear. And even as a child, now I had a lot of very strange behaviors, which caused my parents a lot of concern. Growing up, you know, I was 6, 7, 8 years old, I would hide under the bed in the apartment, sometimes for quite a while, and my mom would think I'm outside playing, or I'd go into the closet. I was just craving the darkness. This was probably a lot of it caused by guilt, thinking I don't deserve to live. And so these strange behaviors caused my parents a lot of concern. I was acting up in school a lot. I had some, you know, typical fights, nothing major, but it was disruptive. It was disruptive in the classroom. I couldn't pay attention. Teachers, you know, would kind of yell, you know, David, get away from the window. I had this hyperactivity. I just couldn't sit still. Public school was absolute torture for me. I couldn't sit still. I had to do all kinds of things. You know, we used to spit balls with the straws and all these other things. And, you know, oh my goodness, all the stuff we used to do.
After school, you got
Yeah. You know, pull somebody's hair. Oh man, yeah. So the teachers were usually pissed at me a lot, you know. And so these are the struggles that my parents had to deal with, trying to understand my behaviors. That's why things got so bad in school that because I had gotten into some fights and things like that, and other behaviors like that. They called my parents in while my mom came in, because my dad was at work. Mom came in, and they basically had a hard talk with us. So listen, we want to get your child, this is maybe starting in the 2nd or 3rd grade, to you need to take him to some kind of child psychologist, or else we can't handle him in these classes, you know. And so that was a real burden for my parents. They really suffered through this, trying to figure things out. In the 3rd grade, my 3rd grade teacher, Miss Drucker, she left me back. She said, you know, there was me and 3 other guys that were being left back. And the day of the end of class, Ms. Drucker made all the other students sit around the edges of, you know, of the walls against the class, and put us right in the center. And then she said to the other students, you've all done well. You're graduating. You're moving on to the 4th grade. You know, good for you. I wish you the very best. And then she turned to us, and she says, you see these 4 right here? They're being left back. Because, you know, whatever she said, I can't remember what she said. I'm just looking around. I remember looking at the students. They were looking at me. I didn't know what to do. I just stood there, and she went into this thing about how these guys were always misbehaving, and I warned them not to do this, not to do that, and they are being left back. Look at them now. This is you, not them, or whatever she said. And it was like, and so when I got the report card, and, you know, my mom was waiting by the door. Okay, how did you do? Here's my report card. I said, Mom, I'm being left back. And she was like, what? I mean, the family, you know, we have a close-knit family, and you know, everybody in it's closer to the neighborhood back then. Everybody knew each other, and, you know, that all the kids knew each other, all the family members knew each other. And she was like, yeah, right, exactly. And it was like, she couldn't process that. She said, okay, we got to go to school. I said, Mom, they're closing. It's the last day of class. She said, we're going to school. So we walked all the way to the school. It was several blocks away, Public School 77 in the Bronx. And, you know, she found that one of the doors was open, so she went in, and she said, you wait out here, you know. And she went in, and she found one of the administrators, Mrs. Stiller, who was a very sweet lady. I knew Mrs. Stiller from, you know, walking the corridors, you see her and things like that. And my mom was in that room up there in the class, somewhere in the school, in administration part or whatever, for about maybe 45 minutes. And then she came back down, And Mrs. Stiller was there, and they said, okay, we're going to give you this chance. We're going to let you go to the 4th grade, but we're going to keep an eye on you and try to help you out and things like that. And I was like in shock. I was kind of rebellious. I didn't care one way or the other. My mom was so relieved. We went back home. I know she told my dad. He was very concerned, but those were some of the issues I faced, during growing up. So I started the 4th grade, and we've been much better with this Mrs. Torres. She was the 4th grade teacher, but still I had issues with my behavior, hyperactivity. It needed like kind of special dental loving care to put up with me. And in the 5th grade, I got into trouble again with Mr. Fleischacker. I was acting up in the classroom. He got so frustrated with me, he grabbed me in a headlock and threw me out of the classroom and said, you wait down in the principal's office. I'm going to talk to you later. You get down there right now. So I was like, it's okay, whatever. And I went down there, and, then he chewed me out. My mom came to school. My mom came to school a number of times over the years to dealing with my son. So these are the issues that I had. I didn't fit in well with school. And the teachers always said that he has the ability to learn, but he just can't focus. He's so distracted. He's so energized. We just can't really control him. And, but back then there was no recognition of,
So when a teacher could hit you or slap you.
oh yeah.
Shaming, a lot of shaming.
A lot of shaming back then. Yeah.
Get any consequence for that. They were allowed to do it.
Yeah.
The phrase he said, not fitting in, it's a theme through his story, but it's also a theme, and David and I have had this conversation many times, it's also a theme in many of the stories of mass shooters, people that feel like outcasts. They feel like outcasts. They feel like they're not part of what's happening. University of Japan did some fascinating studies. They took a group of rodents and they isolated a sample, 15, 20 days, whatever it was, 15, 20 days of isolation. They return the rodents back to the community, and when they return them back at the point of reentry, they aggressively attack the other rodents that were initially their community. Because isolation, our aggression level goes up, our empathy level goes down. Bible says in Genesis chapter 2, it is not good for man to be alone. I don't know what Adam was doing, whether he was chasing a pigeon with a stick or hitting his head up against a tree, but God stopped and said he needs a friend. He needs a friend.
I think what I'm hearing too of David's case, you could be isolated.
Even amongst people. There's a difference between being with people and bonding with people. Big difference.
So now you're, what made you go into the military?
Again, I finished public school, and then went to junior high school, and then went on to high school, and my life, I got along with everyone pretty good, but it was a time of transition. My mom was really the staple of my life, because she was always there for me. My mom, Earl, was a homemaker. And so when she passed away, I was 14. She got cancer, and they gave her 6 months to live, but she only lived about 3.5 months after the diagnosis.
She died.
Yeah, she died. And so it was just my dad and I, and the neighborhood, it was so much going on, even just outside myself, the whole neighborhood began to change at that time. The traditional working class people that lived in that neighborhood, we got to move away. There was a lot of crime. They were on the roof of our building. The heroin addicts were gathering up there. You hear them walking around at night. This was on Stratford Avenue in the Bronx. And this was back in the 60s, actually. So the mid-60s, the later 60s. And so we had to move. We moved to Co-op City, which is a new housing development that had opened up. And so we left Soundview, and all my friends that I grew up with, everyone was moving. every day you'd see moving trucks, a couple of moving trucks on that street because people were moving out so fast. It was the whole neighborhood was turning around, and there was a lot of crime in the building. There was urine bottles, beer bottles in the building, and people hanging out. It got real bad. So anyway,
You know, in my former life, guys who were in trouble, they take care of it and just leave them in the Bronx. Make that straight. That's a bad one. They're too young to.
yeah. No, I used to. Now, one of the things that saved me is I love to ride my bike. I mean, I literally rode my bike every which way you can imagine, sometimes for hours at a time. After my mom passed away, I would just get up in the mornings on the weekend when I didn't have to go to school. At 7 a.m., I would pedal my bike until well after 6 o'clock at night, coming home when my dad was coming home and things like that. I rode everywhere. I had through the projects, to every neighborhood you could think of, all the way up to Pelham Bay, City Island. I rode my bike all the way up to Westchester County. And yeah, that was
He rode his bike to Cos Cob
yeah.
from the Bronx.
Yeah.
28 miles, 30 miles.
Yeah, I used to go all the way up to White Plains, New Rochelle, north of that to Armonk, and some places I just exploring. I just had this energy. I was this ball of energy. I was at a level of hyperactivity. I can't explain it. And my other friends, we used to ride our bikes together at times, but they couldn't go past a certain point in the neighborhood, like a two block radius either way. That was the limit. They don't go past that. But I was the adventurous one. I had to just keep going, and so. But that was good. That was good for me. And my dad got me a nice little 3-speed bicycle, and so I felt like king of the road. And but again, things began to change. Well, anyway, when I moved to Co-op City, I found a whole new set of friends, and started a new life. And it was just me and my dad. And I was going to high school then, and I was not a good student. I was truant a lot. I couldn't sit. Again, hyperactivity. I couldn't focus or concentrate. So I did manage to graduate, but even months before that, I already made up my mind that I was going to go into the Army. I had friends in Co-op City. We became really close. One of them, his dad was a New York City firefighter who died in the line of duty, Ed Snedeker. And this is before I met Ed. And so I always had an interest in the firehouse, because there used to be a firehouse at Soundview that I used to go to sometimes. And, the firemen were friendly there. And then I also became a auxiliary police officer. And when I was 17, they had a thing. We had a rescue truck. They allowed us to join, me and the guys from the neighborhood. And so we really did a lot of positive things. Back then, they had the hippie era where a lot of kids were smoking dope and things like that. I was like pretty much straight-laced. I was a conservative guy, And so I did that. A lot of experiences. But when it came to school, and I was getting, in my final year in the 12th grade, the question is, what am I going to do with my future? And I couldn't see myself going on to college or anything like that. I hated school, absolutely hated it. And so I said, well, the military would be a good place to go. And so I did. I chose the Army. I was very patriotic. Vietnam was going on at the time. And so I went over to the recruiting station that was on Gun Hill Road or White Plains Road. I don't know if there was a recruiting station there by the subway train. And I went in there and started to talk to the recruiter about joining the Army. I still had a few months left before I finished school. And they had a program where you could sign up and join the Army, not officially, but do all the paperwork and preparations. So when you're ready when you do graduate, you can go right into the service. And that's what I did. I spoke with my dad. My dad didn't really want me to go into the military. He was in the Army during World War II. But I felt that this was good for me. I had nothing else to do with myself. So on the day they had the graduation in Christopher Columbus High School in the Bronx, I was on my way to Fort Dix, New Jersey, and that's where I took my basic training. And then I signed up for infantry, so I went to Fort Polk, Louisiana for infantry training. Then I went to Korea. I went to South Korea to serve in the infantry unit over there, which was an adventure. It was an adventure. But originally I wanted to go to Vietnam, but the recruiter said they're not sending troops to Vietnam right now, the combat troops, because as things were winding down. This was the middle of 1971. And so it started a pullback. So he said to me, well, the best thing to do is put in to go to South Korea. And when you get there, since you'll be in Asia, it might be easier to go over there. So I did, but I ended up at South Korea. They didn't have any kind of switch over thing. So I served for a 13-month tour in South Korea. I patrolled the demilitarized zone. I was with a mechanized infantry unit. And then I got back to the States and ended up at Fort Knox, Kentucky. And from there, when I was finished my 3-year enlistment, honorably discharged, I went back to the Bronx, to start a new life. By this time, I was 21. I saved up about $5,000 from being in the Army because I lived on post, so I didn't have many expenses. And I was just ready to go back to the Bronx and start a whole new life. I had plans to, when I got back home with my dad, I looked for my friends, and really they all it was some of them were around, but everyone was preoccupied with other things. Everything had changed. I started to enroll in college under the GI Bill. I went to Bronx Community College for, right after my enlistment. I also became a security guard for IBI Security, working the night shift. So I was working and going to college at the same time. This was in 1974. And so life seemed to be looking up for me. And, if someone would have told me when I was in the services, look, Dave, when you go back to New York, you're going to have some problems. You're going to end up in prison. You're going to, mess up real bad. I would look at what are you talking about? Well, I got a vision of you getting into trouble later on. I said, well, there's no way. I had good goals. I mean, I never thought this would happen. I never dreamed by wildest imagination.
But underneath the surface, above the surface, military, going to college, connecting with people socially, underneath the surface from the time you were young, and I know because I've spent 34 sessions with you, there was a brewing, accumulating anger that eventually resulted in 15 shootings.
Okay, whatever that was,
Did the Army do anything to?
Well, no, I was infantryman, but we did, since I joined the Army, I was 18, it's like going off to college. Kids could be kind of wild, even though I was an adult, I was still maybe a kid at heart. We used to get high a lot when we went to Korea because the marijuana was all over the place. We used to do LSD, some of the guys I was with, but I still served the country, but I just never thought that, that things would happen like this. It just took a turn. I remember coming back to to New York, to my friends from Co-op City, and found out that, everyone was in a period of transition. And so I was trying to find my way, and it was kind of lonely. I was looking for my hope in life was to, when I got out of the Army, get a job, take advantage of the GI Bill, get an education, find a girlfriend, get married, and raise a family.
That age range, 18.
I don't know how this happened. I don't know.
18 to 25 years old. If you look at the statistics, the amount of suicides, homicides, auto accidents from 18 to 25, drug overdoses, it's a window of time where I've just left structure of high school, structure of home, and now if there's been, long-standing mental health issues, that's the time it's going to surface because I'm aimless. I've got no one really to check on me. If I haven't found a wife, settle down, have a family, if I haven't found my career, that 18 to 25 window, it can be a very dangerous window when the psyche's not right.
See, it's fascinating to me is that everybody's got their issues. You had your issues, but you lived a pretty
On the surface.
on the surface.
I had a lot of problems with depression. I struggled with depression quite a bit. And that was something I always had to deal with.
Let me ask you, because at that time, people didn't, in clinical depression, you didn't really recognize it
No.
like you do today.
Yes.
You weren't on any medication or anything,
No, no, nothing. No.
so it wasn't even recognized really. It was
I
just
didn't.
dealing.
I didn't think I needed any help with anything. I was trying to live my life, but I was showing some signs of disturbance. That I met my birth family, had a wonderful time meeting them, and we had a good relationship. I was over there a lot to their houses in Queens, and yeah, my sister, who I found after 22 years, my birth mother. She was a wonderful lady. I found out I had a brother-in-law, I had two nieces, and also an extended family. It was like my life was like a whole new life was opening up, but at the same time, I had internal issues that I was dealing with. I was trying to find my way. My dad had moved to Florida. He retired. He got married. He moved to Florida. That was a wise decision for him. He needed that because he was alone too. My mom had died several years earlier, and nothing seemed to work out. I went and got an apartment, and it wasn't the best. And I got frustrated there with the neighbors, and I moved again. And I met some other people that said, one of the fine friends. I ran into some bad people that were not. They were just into some occult stuff. It sounded interesting to me. And so we used to go to Pelham Bay Park once in a while and just hang out and meet there and smoke dope. But this time I was, working. I was trying to make ends meet, and just a lot of life pressures. It was just a very vulnerable time. I was open to things. And
Was there one incident that just said, okay, at this point, this is what caused you to start doing this thing? I mean,
I think, well, first of all, I don't have my notes with me, but I feel I was really traumatized by demons since I was a child. And I've gotten so much evidence of this over the years. After I became a Christian, I didn't understand it back then, but the Lord opened up my eyes years later to see all of these different events that kind of gelled together to cause this to happen. And I always had a fascination with the darkness, even as a kid, because I would hide it under the bed, I would hide in the closet, I would wander the streets at night, and my parents sometimes didn't know where I was, and it was really upsetting to them. I couldn't stay in the house, so there was a lot of odd behaviors and difficult things. So I just got a satanic Bible. I started to read that. Some other guys thought that we should get.
is that from this cult group?
Yeah, it was a group. It was a group
Yeah.
of people that and so I would just say some prayers and make promises to the devil. I came under some strange teachings which talked about the end of the world, and we have to do our part to bring in the end of the world, to set up the new millennium. It was just a bunch of satanic. By this time, I was about 22, 23, yeah.
Keep in mind, 22, he's out of the army, lonely, looking for belonging, needing companionship. And now, you run into a group of people that are offering that.
Basically sickness.
Oh, yeah, they're found,
And there's a synergy that happens. You know it when you're in a crowd. That synergy, in psychology, they call it de-individuation, where a person loses their personal identity, kind of become immersed in the group. And now that sort of a group think, if you want to call it that, it empowers an individual. In the animal kingdom, wolves behave much more ferociously in packs than they do when they're walking in the jungle alone. It's that empowerment from the group kind of bring us to levels that we would maybe reach by ourselves.
Yeah, well, I struggled to find my place in society. I had a lot of good things going for me. I took a postal exam. I became a postal worker. I was working with a good crew of people on the midnight shift and things like that. But still, I was dealing with internal issues. The term would be mental health issues, but I know it was also spiritual issues. There's something had gotten a hold of my life, something demonic, and I just kind of lost my way. My thinking became very delusional. I thought there were people in the neighborhood after me. I got some weapons, a shotgun, a rifle, a pistol, and you know, I was really living, although in some ways I was, living my life, inwardly I was just wrestling with this forces of darkness because I thought some of my neighbors were plotting against me. I tried to, I fired nowhere. When I was thinking up, when I moved to Yonkers was a terrible decision to move up there. I was in the Bronx, so I moved to New Rochelle. That was a disaster. That I moved to Yonkers. The neighbors in that building, it was intolerable. I had to sleep in my car. A lot of times I wouldn't even go home. I go to Orchard Beach and park there at night to get sleep and things like that. So it was my life was unraveling. It was unraveling mentally at a fast pace. And even my sister noticed it, and my dad noticed it and saw me punching my adoptive father, see me punching myself in the head. I used to do that a lot. I used to beat myself up. Even as a kid, I used to pound myself in the head a lot as some kind of anger, which I took out on myself. It's such a long story. I broke all my toys when I was a kid. Anything you put in my hand, I'll eventually break it. And I guess a lot of anger issues that I don't understand the reason for a lot of that. But with that aside,
When we met over the 34 sessions, we identified 9 themes that surfaced in our meetings: isolation, shame, anger, abandonment, trauma, cognitive distortions, believe it or not, head trauma. David did suffer a couple of blows to the head at a young age, which is, if you look at the statistics, the criminal population is 9 times more likely to have suffered a head trauma. Those head traumas, guys like Dr. Daniel Amen have shed great light on what they do to mood regulation, what they do in as far as sensitivity to sounds. David has a misophonia, where there's an irritability when certain sounds happen around him and can really provoke and push him. Thank God for Christ today. I mean, I've seen such a transformation in this man's life and how he navigates through the challenges that he has today and how he navigated it through 40 years ago is night and day.
All right, well, there you have it. You heard an hour of David Berkowitz's story, his life story. I hope you came away the same way that I did, believing that he's sincere, believing that he really has accepted Jesus Christ, believing that he has taken total responsibility for his crimes, and that he knows that he'll never get out of prison. It was fascinating that the mother of one of the victims actually contacted him and communicated with him and forgave him. That's Christianity, people. Oh my gosh, how hard is that? Very hard. But when you have Jesus Christ in your heart, things like that happen. Just think about, what a better place this world would be if we can forgive those that hurt us at times. And I know, yes, Michael, that's an unreal situation. We got, people warring, and I get it all. I understand that. And it's probably going to be that way until the end of time, until Jesus returns, and until Scripture prophecy is totally fulfilled. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this interview. I was fascinated by it. I hope you understand maybe a little bit better some of the mental health issues that David experienced that caused him in part to do this terrible crime. I was fascinated by the fact that he actually grew up in a good home, but things just took him over. Some people are more fragile than others. Some people handle things better than others. Sometimes it could be something very traumatic for me that doesn't really impact you. We're all different people. Mentally, physically, emotionally, we're different, and things affect us differently. Again, I want to really, really encourage you to read this book. As a matter of fact, I'm going to make it available on my website because I think it's an important book for you to read. It really is. For those of you who maybe have experienced a mental health issue or have a family member, a friend, those of you that just walk around and see some of these homeless people and wonder why are they in this condition, what drove them to be where they are now. This book has a lot of answers. And you saw an hour of David. In here, there's 100 hours of David. And you're also going to get a perspective from my dear friend, Mike Coppola, who is, again, just brilliant. This is his walk in life, I believe, as well as being a strong Christian. He certainly has a gift, and I appreciate him taking the time to write this book and for introducing me to David. So That's it for today. And again, you can go on Amazon and probably on my site shortly, and we'll make the book available. So how do I always leave you, my friends? Same way, never going to change. Be safe. Please be safe. You know, I'm not going to get into that in every single time. Ladies, you especially. Be healthy. Got to take care of yourself, people. It's important. And I really mean this from the bottom of my heart to each and every one of you. God bless each and every one of you and your families. See you next time.